Okay, welcome to the book chat for Making with Data. Da, da, da.
Yay, we finally got the copies.
Yes,
So happy.
that is the moment of extreme joy. And it turned
Yeah.
out so very well.
It's so beautiful. Such a beautiful book.
So, and it is a glorious book edited by Lora and Wes and Samuel, and physical design and craft in a data-driven world. So it's fitting that the physical artifact is now in our hands because it's an entire book about data physicalization.
Yeah, it is an amazing book. And well, thank you for making the time to meet with us today. The purpose of the conversation is to talk about obviously the contents of the book itself, but also how the book came about, talk a little bit about yourselves. We keep these conversations super informal and completely unstructured and and low tech. I would like to begin actually to focusing on sort of like the contents of the book, and then perhaps we can zoom out. Something that I really appreciate about this book is that it's not merely a collection of projects, although it is that, right? It's like a description of, the work of many designers and the way that they transform data into objects. Sometimes those objects are static, sometimes they are interactive, sometimes you can play with them, sometimes you can see some huge variety of projects, but it also has some sort of like theory behind it, right? So the infographic, for example, that you have, I think that is on pages 24 and 25, which describes the physical representation of data and the sort of like the different names in there. I found that particularly helpful to organize my own brain around sort of like all these new expanding world of possibilities of data representation. Maybe we could begin talking a little bit about that. Did you learn through the process of writing the book about, how big the world out there is or is becoming?
And Till, do you have that fancy book camera so we can actually see it?
Sure, happy to. So the book, and this is like the small version of what Alberto was just referring to, and the double spread with all these kind of different terminologies. Laura, please.
I was just going to jump in. So in the introduction of the book, one of the big things we wanted to do is point out that this is the opposite of a new practice. This is like OG data visualization, because before we had graphics, we had stuff. So even earlier in the introduction, we try to make links to historical examples, just so that it's absolutely clear that we are not proposing necessarily a new idea. We're connecting it to this very long history of representation through physical media. But then as we started to think through the book and recruit through the book, people to add chapters, it became very clear that it was not fair to stick to one terminology when approaching people or when looking for examples, because people are referring to their work in completely different ways. People think about their own practice in radically different ways. And instead of trying to make it one homogeneous, this is data physicalization, we actually try to step back from data physicalization, which is a very InfoVis term, and try to talk more about physical data representation, and then mirror whatever language people were using to refer to their own work. So in some cases, people thought of themselves as data sculptors. Other people thought of themselves as roboticists who were just doing data stuff. We tried to mirror the language of the people that we were working with as best we could, but reflecting the diversity of ways that it kind of all still connects to each other.
Well, if I could add to that too, I think it's a really interesting space, because as visualization people, we tend to mostly just think about the eyes, but when you start to look at what people have done historically and some of the cool places where people are pushing the boundary now, you realize that there are interesting opportunities with all of the senses. And a lot of the projects that we're curating here tend to focus a bit more on touch still, in addition to seeing and sort of the physical experience of exploring data. But there's this really vast space outside of that when you start to think about edibilization or olfactation, et cetera.
If I can just add one point to that. I think one of the issues is also to find award. So we wanted to try to look at all the definitions that was out there. And we, at one point, we tried to compare them, and it was really difficult to make kind of a visualization of this definition.
I was about to say that sometimes it is not even necessary to define things strictly, right? Sometimes we get, particularly people who are who work in an academic environment like Tamara and I, sometimes we get tangled up into sort of like jargon discussions and whether something is a data visualization or not, whether something is a physicalization. Who cares? Just do the work. This is so cool. Doesn't really matter how we call it, right? I mean, these projects are all amazing. Tamara, you were going to say something?
No, I was actually just leafing through, wondering which is the next section we want to talk about.
Oh, we can talk about all of them. I mean, I have sort of like
all the sections. Yeah, let's just go through. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, something I could jump directly to the end of the book, because besides introducing this world that, as I said, existed before, and we are essentially recovering and expanding now, and then presenting in the core of the book tons of different examples that are extremely inspirational. The book ends with a call to action, right? Which is something that I really like. It's like you invite people to say, you know, take a look at all this wonderful work that is being done. Just join the party. I mean, so just get in. I really like that. I like the positive tone of the book and how friendly and approachable it is. While reading it, actually, I've never done a physical visualization myself ever. I mean, perhaps with Lego pieces or something like that, but nothing particularly serious. But while reading the book, I thought, you know, I could partner up with my colleague here at the University of Miami who teaches physical computing. And then we can create a data, you know, physical representation, data visualization with objects, whatever we want to call it, course, and we could co-teach it, and then students can practice and experiment with all these technologies. So I found it inspiring also because of that call to action. What will be your sort of like, you could talk a little bit about perhaps maybe about, we could begin talking about specific projects, your favorites or your favorite sections, or if not, I can do it because I have several projects that I really like.
It was sort of funny because when making the book, we each sort of took charge of one of the sections so that we could keep track of what happened within them. But if you ask us, so we're more familiar, and obviously we like those sections a lot, but if you ask us to step back, I think we each sort of look over at the other sections and find ones that are really interesting. So even though I end up helping sort of curate the handcrafted section, I actually really like Remedy Protocol's 100% City, which is over in participation, just because it reflects a totally different skill set and way of making that has less to do with sort of design and fabrication, which I'm much more familiar with, and more to do with how do you put on a theater production that reflects the place where you're putting on the production. So I just found it fascinating to hear the story of how that practice works and how that piece came to be, and then how they continually adapt the piece to each of the cities that they're in. So the piece itself is really well, like extremely well planned, because they have to know where they're going to go and find the 100 people who are going to participate, make sure that they understand the data that they're trying to reflect and recruit accordingly, and then design and develop these sort of interactive pieces that happen throughout the course of the theater piece, and make sure it sort of forms a coherent narrative, which is, it's all temporal making in a way. It's really thinking about it as a theater director. How do you create a piece with data, which is heavily participatory, and like I find super fascinating as someone who tends to be on the like physical widget making side of the world.
I have thoughts about that particular piece. So I'm going to actually make a plug to another book that we recently published by Nagel Holmes, a Joyful Infographics. So Nagel does, I didn't have a term for what he does sometimes on the stage, but now I have. So like it's a data staging or whatever we want to call it, but it's like you use the public to visualize some sort of data. So he does this exercise in which he tries to show you how long the history of the universe really is. And what he does is to ask people to stand up and to actually position themselves proportionally to the amount of time that it takes from I don't remember whether it is from the beginning of time or from the formation of the earth until the appearance of human beings, right? It's like, first of all, you have these sort of like huge distances of several yards between people representing millions of years. And then he said, the tip of your finger is the history of humankind, right? Is that's the amount of time that we have been on this universe. And I always find those exercises fascinating, just because it's so physical, right? It's so visceral. It's like you see it, and it has some sort of warmth that virtual or digital representations of data don't have. That sort of approachability to the information. I found that project incredible. What about the others? Other projects that perhaps from the other sections that we just discuss?
One remark to this project, because at Darkstuhl, so where this whole book started, or it was like the initial discussion and workshops, there we also did this kind of like physical representation with our own bodies to represent like how long were our travels to go to Darkstuhl, which is like in Germany. And so this, as you just said, or as also I think is they intend, because the 100 people are representing the city, and we were representing, of course, the participants of that workshop, and to just show them who is my neighbor, who I'm standing close to. And this also is, of course, a relation to maybe the universities or the affiliations we are related to, and I love that. And it's also very playful and approachable, as you just said. Yeah, I like it.
Until what was the one that stood out the most to you?
Stood out the most. There are so many chapters I love, so many projects I admire, but I selected Wage Island by Akini Ijoma, which is in the digital production section, but it could also have been to the actuation section. So we have these different 5 themes, but what I love about this project specifically is that it is, for me, it is a kind of combination or bridging piece between more data art pieces and more data analysis pieces, because it combines these 2 worlds very nicely. So what it shows is it is a 3-dimensional map of New York, and it is the whole sculpture, this 3-dimensional terrain or elevated terrain, is submerged in an aquarium with dark water or some kind of dark liquid. And then it's also interactive. So you can see here, like visitors can press a button, can change between different wages or income levels. And then the whole sculpture moves within or submerges into the water or comes out of it. And so it acts as a data filter to show where are the islands, at what specific level of income people still can afford an apartment or a flat or something. And so I think it is super, super interesting project. What I meant like with data art, because it's very semantically close. It uses a metaphor of wage islands. Where can people still live? Like on what kind of small areas in New York people still can survive with their income. And at this, and on the other hand, it also is like an actual data piece with an even interactive filter. And I love that. And many physicalizations, like I think on the from a larger perspective, are or have more a bit of this kind of metaphorical and very close relation to the data theme in their design. And then there's some, of course, like a 3D printing, maybe a bar chart or something, which is also generalizable or used for any kind of data. And in this piece, also Akini reflects in his writing himself, he tries to bridge this gap between, as I said, like data analysis and data art, and I love that.
And it's just so amazing to have a physicalization of ISO contours. Like before I saw this chapter, it would not have crossed my mind that one could do that. Wes, what are your favorites?
Yeah, so on mine, some of the ones that I was really drawn to are the ones that just push the envelope in terms of scale. So one of these, also in our section that's focused a little bit more on digital production techniques, is Orbicles. This is from Dan Keefe and the MinLab Design Collective. This is a set of big architectural scale installations in a park in central Minneapolis. that are showcasing different outcomes for native bird species under different climate conditions. And what I really love about it is just this idea of taking these data sets and making them something that is really bigger than any individual, something that you can sort of walk around and explore physically, and have conversations around in a way that you just might not with a physical artifact. And we have a couple of projects that have this flavor in the book. There's also the airfield project a little bit later on, from Dan Goods, Nick Hafermas, and Jamie Barlow. There was an installation in the Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport where they had these big liquid crystal panels that would illuminate as planes came in to land or as they would take off, and start to give you this sort of much larger than any individual sense of the space and things that are going on. And I have a little friend who's very into planes at the airport. I think he would appreciate the fun.
I think.
Excellent. That is a very physical representation of planes. Samuel, what are your thoughts?
Well, well, it's really difficult for me to choose one, but one of the things that I really like is the difference in process. So for instance, if we are going inside the Encraft section, there is this piece from Lauren Madsen, which is called Happy Endings. And what I really like from him is he was like just saying, my first step is find a pipe bender, because he wanted to make a piece with pipe. And you know, most of the time we are saying we should start with data, but it seems like a lot of people are starting with a lot of different things. And I also really like the one from Pauline Bourlet and Thierry Dassé, Cairn, which is it's basically a tangible physical form, and it's asking question about documenting your activity in a fab lab. And just by adding one cairn inside the table, you can input almost like 13 different dimensions. It's crazy. I find it totally crazy. And their approach is also like not starting with data, but starting by identifying a problem inside the fab lab. There is like one other project that I find, well, two other projects that I find also crazy that are not starting with data. That there is this one which is like Mathieu Le Goc, Charles Perrin, Sean Folmer, Jean-Daniel Feket, and Pierre Dragišević. So it's a project that I find really inspiring because they are like putting basically robots inside token, and it's when you're looking at the video, it's such a wow effect. You can see a lot of tokens that could compose a visualization, but that you can also move and change and reorganize. And maybe the last one I wanted to talk is perceptual plastic. I think it's just fascinating for me. And also again, it starts with just an inspiration before having the data, and then a location, and then trying to get the data and trying to make this gigantic sculpture, which is after shot with a drone, and then they are labeling the different. So the sculpture is about how much plastic we are consuming, how much we are recycling, and how much we are incinerating. And yeah, to me, it's like such a piece that I print one of the picture and I put it in my wall in my office because I like it so much.
I hope that people viewing this video will notice that the book doesn't just reproduce the projects and doesn't just include photographs of what the projects look like, but it also has sort of like, it also outlines the process. So there are tons of sketches, drafts, mock-ups, actual visualizations. For example, in the Eternal Plastic project, which is one of my favorites. I mean, I love all of them, but it's hard to decide which one I like the most. But on that one, there are actual some data visualizations in there, right? That they probably use to explore the data before visualizing it. So again, it's not just a showcase of projects, it's also an educational tool that people can use, take inspiration from, learn from. It's a fascinating book. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and one of our main sort of motivations behind the book was to go beyond the sort of, the coffee table book or the book that you get after you go to the art gallery that has just the glamour shots. We really wanted to highlight, like, the emphasis of the book is on the process, but also we intentionally were trying to stay away from the notion of a cookbook. We didn't want the, like, here's how to do this at home per se. We wanted to be true to people's real processes and the real problem solving that happens, but also to show that, like, yeah, you can start with data, you can start with a site, you can start with a material or a tool and still end up with something interesting. So hopefully freeing people to think about all of the different ways that you can begin a project like this or end a project like this. You don't necessarily have to end with, a 3D printed bar chart. You could actually end up with a giant installation in an airport or a theater piece or a participatory visualization in the streets. So there's so many ways that you can go with this sort of new way of looking at the world.
And to go meta, what I always want to do, I really liked how you had these incredibly divergent situations, and you're like, and how would one bookify these very different things? And so you ended up with this structure where in each of these sections, you've got like project motivation and inspiration, practices and processes, materials and tools, right, which range from 3D printing to trash and debris found on beaches, reflections, and you do have some beautiful hero shots, right? So you do have some of these full page, utterly beautiful ones. So what I love, what I like about this series is that we always encourage, when we do go in the more coffee table direction, it's never just about beauty. Beauty is crucial and important, but it's also about the underlying content. And so I really love the balance that you guys have found between the aesthetics and the information. But as you said, it is not a how-to. It is not prescribing, but it's doing an amazing job of describing and inspiring.
What I think is super great to see are the different voices of the people. As you just said, they are so diverse, their backgrounds, the disciplines, the perspectives. And we wanted to, or we invited all the authors, all the contributors to speak and to write about and to reflect on their projects in their own voices, and exactly to learn about not only, we gave this kind of structure, but to have this kind of consistent way of looking at the projects, but still having it very open-ended, very freely for them to decide on what kind of aspects they wanted to focus on. And I think that worked excellent, because I'm always stumbling upon like little bits and pieces here and there, and to learn new things about the project, not only by the text, but also by the artifacts, by the design artifacts, by the documentation of the process, which is really great to see. And maybe one more thing regarding this template, or the how we structured it, as you just said. So we have this kind of inspiration, and then the steps and the process and a reflection section and so on. This actually stemmed from interviews we started in the beginning at Darkstuhl still. So it's kind of a bottom-up approach, because through these interviews with very early contributors or authors, we learned also how they were describing their process. And based on that, and we did a transcription and a bit of a coding, we then came to these different sections and also gave them prompts. So for the later authors, they were more and more streamlined, let's say, but still, again, keeping it open to hear their voices, to hear their own thoughts.
So maybe this is a good segue into how this did start. Clearly, there was a Darkstuhl workshop that crystallized things. How did it progress from there?
I think, Sam, do you want to try taking this one? Do you remember how we read at Darkstuhl? It was 2018. We were all in Germany at this crazy castle place called Darkstuhl.
Well, I think until you have some picture from the so I think I think the Darkstuhl was organized by Yvonne Jensen, Pierre Dragicevic, Jason Alexander, Peter Eisenberg, and we ended to be a group. And one of the questions we were looking at was authoring and prototyping tool. I think this is one of the first whiteboard that we made for discussing about the book. And one of the issue, we had a lot of, because it was a data physicalization DAX tool, I wanted to data physicalize data phys list. Maybe you know this website which is made by Yvonne Jensen and Pierre Dragicevic. It's a website where you have like 300 or 400 different physicalization reference. So we made a kind of card-based game, and we were trying to identify what was the common tool and what was the common authoring practices. And I think we end up with this idea to try to classify this physicalization by rendering process. All the data are rendered. And that's how we came up with the 5 sections that are composing this. But I'm not sure it's giving a good...
it's like at the dog stool, we started doing things like interviewing the fellow participants at the dog stool, since many of the people at the dog stool were designers and creators of physicalizations themselves. So we just pull them aside after dinner and have a chat with them and then take a look at our notes. So we were able to do that. The other thing is the website is dataphys.org. Highly recommend it. It is a fantastic resource if you want examples for data physicalizations. Is that sort of, it airs more on the coffee table book, the here's the glamour shot of the final installation, but it doesn't tell, you don't actually see the process. And when we're thinking about how do we think about new authoring tools, you can't do that based on the final artifact. You have to understand how it came to be, which is how we ended up starting these interviews and then went, wait a minute, what if we put this together as a book instead of just trying to like do this as a data collection process? It sort of seemed too shallow to do this as like an academic paper, and in many ways served the format as a book better so that each story can have space to breathe, and you actually could potentially get more stories and their full richness across all the chapters of the book. Oh man, yeah, and that was 2018. So we've been at this for quite some time.
Time flies by, and I think that is hard. It's hard for people to understand how long the process is of putting a book together, because it's not just the writing, right? It's like you first of all need to talk to people, then you need to write the book, then the book needs to be edited, then there is production, it's like you start adding at the time, and it's like it takes years.
Plus, you had this cast of thousands, right? I mean, there's the 4 of you as editors. You've got a forward for each of those 5 sections. Then for each of the sections, you have almost all of them are multiple co-author ones there. So there's a lot of people involved in this endeavor.
Yeah, and we sort of figured out the themes, and then eventually tried to make sure that we had a diversity of examples within a theme. We didn't want to have like a token digital production example and then move along, or a token environmental example and then move along. So we wanted to make sure that even if we had a starting point for a section like, hey, Dietmar Offenhuber's Staubmarke are definitely don't fit into any of the other categories, but are definitely this new category of data physicalization. Okay, if it's sort of this environmental category, okay, now how do we find others in this category? So we try to do our due diligence to fill out the categories, as opposed to just saying like, well, we already know one person, we'll just stick with that one person. So we actually went and recruited people specifically for their projects to get a bit more of that diversity. Yeah.
And if we are talking about meta level and how it came to be, if I may, I also wanted to share some of the many tools we used in all the different sheets and everything, because I think it's also kind of an interesting insight into like what it is what's all about. Let me just share the screen. So for example, this one here is an early timeline in Notion, which we used. Then we had like loads and loads of, oh, sorry, I'm not, am I sharing the screen? Yes, I do. Okay, perfect. So lots and lots of Google Docs, and we have this super huge, this is like the major list of the whole overview of all the different chapters and sections, and then all these kind of links with even like the contracts and everything. But we also have lots of like Miro boards. This, for example, was another view, another potential display of showing this kind of histo, which we shared already before. Here, for example, Alberto, you mentioned this. like how to organize like the different terminologies. And we had like these kind of different diagrams, trying them out and also showing the fuzziness and so on, but also simplify simple enough and so on, just to show, I mean, for all the other people now listening and seeing this and thinking about doing a book, please do. It's great, but also it takes years and it takes time. And also why, because I think for all of us, it was the first book. So while we were doing it, we also had to try out all the different tools and systems and things to just find solutions for all this kind of organization.
Something that surprised me about in a very good way, working with you, in comparison to the way that I write books myself, is how organized you are. I mean, all those spreadsheets and links and everything is carefully labeled. It's like, you should see my databases. I mean, they are embarrassing in comparison. So you did a great job. And I hope that, yeah, I mean, maybe describing the process to potential readers of the book and showing some of those sketches, early sketches of the diagram with the different terms or whatever. I think that may be super interesting. So I've seen the backstage of the book production.
Yeah, we do have a website, makingwithdata.org, and our first blog post was the story behind the cover, because the cover
let's talk about the cover.
The cover, we went back and forth and we were trying to figure out, like, maybe we can just select some photos from the book, and then picking from among the projects for which would go on the cover was like an excruciating, like we could not agree among the four of us. And like our graphic designer also was like not really happy with any of them either. And so we at some point went back to the drawing board. Actually, I don't know if someone can pull up the blog. The blog post actually has it all in there. We tried one route, that did not work. And so then we kind of took a step back and said, like, okay, what if we took a more meta route? Because we were exploring, like, well, what if we had like one physicalization on the cover, and it doesn't even have to be that readable. I'm like, what if it was readable? So we went from things that were much more literal to things that became much more abstract, because it was starting to think about, like, well, what if we took data about the book, made it physical, and used that as our book cover. So yeah, so it's actually one of the busy people should probably take over, because I'm not the best at describing the particular kind of, it's a joy plot, but it's not a joy plot.
Ridge plot.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's a ridge plot. So it's a ridge plot, and then each of the waves reflects the word count for the different sort of standard sections we have for each of the chapters. So we knew that each chapter had a motivation section, a process section, a reflection section, tools and materials section. So we took the word counts and made this ridge plot with waves, and then we did not actually create it, but we are not experts when it comes to paper art. We were sort of envisioning this like layered paper piece. So we actually commissioned a paper artist, Betty Solomon, to create the thing, which meant now we had the classic gap between design and fabrication, and had to explain, okay, here's what we're envisioning. And so Betty had all of the paper, like had the palette of paper, had a much better understanding of the paper finish and quality and how it would photograph, because she's a professional paper artist. She knows what she's doing. And we kind of provided the curves so that she could assemble it together. And so while the book is, it's one of these weird meta-circular things where the image on the cover is actually an image of a physicalization that exists in the world. And it's actually, I think, Sam, it's in your office right now, I believe.
Yeah, there is two versions in my office.
The other kind of fun thing there, at least for the soft cover, is that we ended up creating a legend for that physicalization that sits on the title page of the book. So if you are in the soft cover edition, you can peel back to the title page and you actually get labels for that physicalization as a little sort of micro physical interaction. So trying to bring a bit of physicalization experience to the act of reading it.
I did not figure that out until this moment. I get it now. I get it. Yes, it totally works.
Easter
Sorry,
eggs.
hardcover
I love
people.
books with Easter eggs.
And so, what do you think is different about what you can do in a book than what you can do at, like, a workshop like Dogstool or a panel like the one coming up at Kai in a few months? How is that different?
I could maybe take a stab at that. I think for us, it's mostly about reaching audiences that are maybe a little bit broader than the traditional academic audiences that we're usually speaking to. So many of the folks who we're collecting in this book are not computer scientists or data visualization researchers. Many of them are artists or designers or architects. And there's a bunch of interesting work that's happening in the space that's happening outside of the folks who are thinking about it as physicalization or talking about it as physicalization. And I think it's also accessible to an even wider range of people. And so thinking about doing this in a book, it's partly about increasing the reach of that. And I think also it's about giving you the opportunity, if you do want to sit down and think about a bunch of these, to do it in a little bit more long form way, where you might actually look at a dozen of these in one sitting, or sort of casually browse through them periodically over the longer period of time if you have it sitting on your coffee table. And so the hope, I think, is to reach more people and in ways in which they may be able to think a little bit more about how this impacts their own practice and the kinds of things that they might want to do.
And what do you hope readers will take away? It sounds like you want them to be inspired, you want them to reflect. Are there other things that you had in mind? I know for me, one of the things that I really care about is it becomes an archival object, right? It stays in the world in a way that has a presence beyond anything you can do on a website. It will not bit rot.
Well, and it's in many ways it's a snapshot in time. So it's, if you look, we tried to add dates to all the pieces, so it's clear that these are not eternal, but this is sort of the state of making with data circa 2023, where we have all of these things that we figured out, all of these new things that aren't Sumerian clay tokens, even though we do have working clay still, that at least provides a glimpse of where we're at in this moment. So I think it sort of provides a nice picture of the present moment in physical representations of data. Personally, as an academic, I sort of have a similar reaction to Alberto, and I think Till can speak to this, where as someone who also teaches courses, I teach a course on tangible and physical HCI. One of my classic assignments is to build me a data physicalization. And it has to be interactive because I care about I care about that interactivity piece. I want them to build something interactive and dynamic using an Arduino. So it's all kind of in that automation category, which means now I have this book that I can say, and this is what I'm talking about. When I'm talking to you about, a dynamic data display, they go like, what are you crazy lady? And I say, this exists in the world. See, here's at least one example. Make me more.
And I think that is also a second thing, at least to me personally, very important for readers to take away, to learn also from the book, is not only to get inspired, but by the projects and by the documentation, by the beautiful photos, but also be inspired by the way people have documented their process. I think you can learn a lot from them, and we are also going to publish or open up the template for others to use. And I used it just in a course on physicalization in my university with students, for them to a bit more have a structure they can follow, and to also use that to reflect again on their own material use and what kind of fabrication tools they use, and compare this in the same style and the same systematic approach of documenting it with like these great projects from established artists and researchers. And I think that is also very valuable, so that it really not as inspiring for, hey, try things out, but then also document it for others. Be part of the whole design space.
Well, you have succeeded magically in having that be a thing in the world now. And it truly is, it's the first book covering this. And I think it is going to be a monumental help to people from all kinds of areas, from researchers to practitioners to artists to designers to computer scientists to the curious to the makers. So congratulations. The book is out there.
Yeah, finally. It's in our hands. Thank you so much again for making the time.
Yes, thank you.
For producing this beautiful object, because it's a beautiful object on its own. Super, super beautiful.
And it's done, and it's out. Woohoo!
Yay. Thank
And I'll
you.
celebrate.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thanks so much.